All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're exploring a really fascinating argument from speaker Rico Cortez. The whole idea is that the lens you use to read the Bible can totally change what you get out of it. We're going to see what happens when you switch from a typical Western philosophical viewpoint to an ancient Hebrew one.
I mean, it's a question a lot of us have asked, right? How can one single book lead to so many different faiths, so many denominations? Well, the perspective we're looking at today suggests the answer isn't about who's right or wrong. It's actually about the fundamental way we've all been taught to think.
Okay, this slide is really the core of the whole thing. The argument is simple. The Bible is a Hebrew document written from a Hebrew mindset. But for the last 2,000 years or so, most of us have been reading it through a Greek and Roman philosophical lens. And look at the difference. Hebrew thought is all about action, stories, and the community. It's concrete. Greek thought, it's about abstract ideas, pure logic, and the individual. It's not a small difference. It's like trying to run Mac software on a Windows PC. They're just different operating systems for reality.
And this clash of perspectives, well, that's what the speaker argues is a huge problem. In fact, he says it's the root of so many of our biggest misunderstandings of the text. This quote really hits home because it's about the speaker's own journey. He's basically saying that the idea of salvation he was taught felt disconnected from the actual stories in the Bible. He had this abstract philosophical concept in one hand, and these biblical stories of actual physical rescue from enemies in the other, and he realized they just didn't line up.
So, let's dig into that idea, because it's a big one. How does our entire understanding of salvation shift when we stop thinking of it as a legal pardon and start seeing it as a physical rescue?
See, from this Hebrew viewpoint, salvation isn't mainly about what happens when you die. It's a real-world, this-world event. The classic example is the Exodus from Egypt. That was salvation. It was a literal, tangible rescue from slavery that put a whole nation back into a right relationship with their God and with each other. The key thing to get here is that it's about being delivered in history, not just from history.
And this just lays out the difference perfectly. The Roman legal way of thinking sees salvation like a courtroom verdict. The gavel comes down and you're declared not guilty. Your legal status is changed. The Hebrew perspective, though, sees it as a rescue mission. It's God stepping into history to save his people from very real threats and to restore the community. One's a legal concept, the other is a historical action.
All right, let's keep building on this. We're going to move to another huge idea, what it means to be made in the image of God, because this too gets a totally fresh look when seen through that Hebrew lens.
You know, in the West, we often think of the image of God as some abstract thing inside of us, our soul maybe, or our ability to reason. But the speaker here argues it's way more concrete. It's not a quality you have, it's a job you're given, the job of representing the invisible God right here on earth. It's a mission, a responsibility, passed down almost like an inheritance.
And you can literally trace this inheritance through the entire Bible. It starts with Adam, right? He's the first one given this task of being God's representative. When that mission gets fractured, the line gets preserved through Noah, and the whole thing gets a reboot. Then that responsibility gets focused through Abraham and his family. They are now the carriers of this image for the sake of the world. And finally, in this view, the whole story culminates in Yeshua, or Jesus, who is seen as the perfect, complete embodiment of that divine image. It's all one continuous story.
Okay, so if we're looking at the big picture this way, what on earth do we do with all those ancient laws in the text that seem, a little strange or outdated to us today?
Here is a perfect example the speaker brings up. I mean, on the surface, this is a very specific, kind of bizarre rule about not using money from prostitution to make an offering in the temple. So how is that supposed to be relevant thousands of years later?
Well, the key is to look past the literal words and ask the question why. Why was this law given in the first place? In that ancient world, temple prostitution was a common part of pagan worship. So this law wasn't really about the money itself. It was about drawing a bright, bold line in the sand between the worship of God and the corrupt practices of all the nations around them. The timeless principle isn't about currency. It's about holiness, about rejecting anything that mixes paganism into your devotion to God.
Okay, let's start tying all these threads together. According to the speaker, when you embrace this Hebrew perspective, it ultimately leads you to a much deeper, much richer understanding of the central figure of the New Testament.
And this is really the big finale of the argument. From this point of view, Jesus didn't show up to cancel everything that came before him. Not at all. He is presented as the climax of the entire Hebrew story, the ultimate rescuer, the perfect image of God, the living, breathing embodiment of the Torah's principles.
To pull him out of his Hebrew context is, in this view, to completely misunderstand who he is.
And all of this leads to a pretty powerful call to action. The speaker is really pushing for personal engagement with the text. Instead of just accepting the interpretations you've been handed down, the argument is that you have to go back to the source yourself, to compare the ideas you've been taught with what the text actually says in its original context. It's a challenge to stop being a passive listener and become an active participant in your own understanding.
So, we'll leave you with this question to think about. Whether you agree with this entire perspective or not, it really forces you to consider the lenses that we all use. How much of what we believe is shaped by our own culture, our own time? And what might we discover if we just tried, for a moment, to look through the eyes of the past? It's definitely something worth mulling over.